Before I explain the topic of today's video, watch this clip and let me know in the comments how you would choose to counter if you were my dad in the gold gloves. In just a moment, I'm going to explain exactly what I would choose to counter with in this situation and why. But first, let's go through all of the basic defenses that we can use to explain this theory that was taught to me by my dad, which he calls the inside-out rule. First off, we have catch jab. Secondly, we have the slips both to the outside and inside of the jab and cross. We can use our guard to block crosses and hooks to the head, as well as to the body by bending the knees, turning the hip blocking the midline with the forearm, touching the elbows to the hips to block shovel hooks. Pendulum blocks, also known as parries, are another great option for blocking the straights to the body. Pulling and rolling the hooks with weaves are great head movements. Something that should be done more frequently is catching the uppercuts. And finally, Floyd's famous shoulder roll. Now, I'm sure that most of you have seen all of those defenses before, but what I rarely see, if ever, is someone explaining why they would choose a particular defense at what time, and just as importantly, what punch to counter with to be most effective. Let's get back to that example in the beginning. In response to my lead shovel hook, my dad chooses to block the body by touching the elbow to the hip and bending the knees. And as you can see, he chose the rear upper as a counter. Now finally, to explain exactly why he or I or anyone else would do it this way. Of course, it makes sense to throw the right hand in any form as my left hand is away from my face at the time. But to better understand why he would choose the defense he used, we have to look from the front at something called the line of attack. The line of attack helps us to define our punches. Straight punches are straight because they land parallel to the line. Hooks are hooks because they tend to land perpendicular to the line, with many variations of punches such as the shovel hook, a cross between an uppercut and a hook that tends to land at around 45 degrees in relation to the line of attack. Once we're aware of this line, it becomes pretty easy to determine whether a punch is coming to the inside or outside of your guard, meaning the only thing left to consider is whether the trajectory of the punch is coming from above or below your guard. Now to recap, he chooses to block the body by touching the elbow to the hip because he's aware that the punch is closer to the outside of his guard than the inside. Because the punch came from below, he bends his knees to sit on the block, leaving him loaded for an unimpeded counterpunch from that same side. The same thing is true on the opposite side. Next we have the catch jab, and since I'm moving right, or rather closer to his lead hand, my dad chooses the jab as a counter. When moving to the left, he decides to counter with the right hand, again because I'm already getting closer to it, but also because he had the superior above hand position at the moment of the catch defense. When slipping to the outside of the cross, he generally chooses the hook, and when slipping to the outside of the jab, he generally chooses the cross as a counter. Again, the superior above hand position allows us to catch the uppercut, generally countering with the opposite hand. Because the punch comes from the left side of the line of attack, when dealing with the jab to the body, my dad chooses the right hand to defend with and the right hand to counter because of the unimpeded counterpunch potential. When defending against the straight right to the body, he chooses the lead hand to defend with because again, it's closer to that side of the line of attack. Here he's showing that it's also possible to counter with the opposite hands. In the case of the shoulder roll, because he doesn't have superior above hand position, the punch must be deflected upwards, leaving him the perfect opportunity to counter underneath with the uppercut. It's also possible to counter with the straight as opposed to the uppercut. When using the pull as a defense for the jab to the head, he generally counters with the right hand. Here's another one that's really obvious with the inside-out rule. You guys may have heard me talk about the wheelhouse of power. In this case, my dad has shortened my punch by moving further to his right, making it weaker and easier to counter to the inside of that same punch. Here he does the same thing by stepping left into my right hook and countering with a lead of his own. My dad likes to refer to these short wheelhouse punches as weak side hooks. In the case of a punch that is within its wheelhouse and has already built up the majority of its momentum, he tries to roll with the punch instead. The same thing is true with the hook. When it's built up the majority of its momentum, he rolls with it and returns with his own. Another option for a punch that's built up the majority of its momentum is to simply go underneath with a roll, generally countering with the same hand of the side he came up on. Finally, let's finish up with some slightly exaggerated examples of the inside-out rule, as well as the superior above hand position rule. Because the cross comes from outside to in, my dad blocks from inside to out, then counters from high to low because he had the less superior below hand position. Here he shows that instead of waiting, it's also possible to shoot inside of certain punches. This check cross is similar to the check hook, the only difference being that it goes to the inside rather than the outside of the offending punch. Here you can see that when he has the above superior hand position, he chooses to block from high to low and then counter from low to high. If you've made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you watching and I hope that you found something valuable out of it. I really hope that this was concise and not too hard to follow. There's so many ways of going about explaining such a complex topic, and I really hope that this was a good way to encompass it all. I say encompass it all, but as I'm sure you can tell, this is by no means a completely exhaustive list. This is just the best way I could think to represent the concept of the inside-out rule and how superior and inferior hand positions help to determine the flow of our offense and defense. So again, I really hope it makes sense. And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, comment down below, let me know what you learned, and subscribe for more future videos. I'm going to let these clips run again so you can watch without any interruption. Have a nice day, guys.